What's on your Amazon wish list? Hey, special educators, it's Jennifer from Positively Learning. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing exactly what I would put on a Amazon wish list. I do not have one, but I'm going to be listing out the things that saved the day over and over again, whether I was pushing into the inclusion classroom setting or pulling out to the resource room. Let's go. Hey, special educators, I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome to the Special Educators Resource Room. If you're like me, you're always looking for ways to save time and streamline your work. That's why this podcast was created, to give you the systems and solutions you need to get your time back. Tune in for tips, tricks, and tools that will help you manage your workload and make the most of your time. Whether you're brand new or experienced, all are welcome in the Special Educators Resource Room. All right, so I'm going to be listing out exactly what I would include on an Amazon wish list. Now, I do have another episode called Special Educators This or That. It's episode 22. In that episode, I am comparing different products and explaining what I would use and why. So if you're looking for a few more details, I highly recommend checking out episode 22. I will put the link in the show notes. What types of things should be on your wish list? Well, of course, answers are going to vary. What do you already have access to? What do your students need? What age group are you working with? And what is the setting? I can only answer based on my own experience and hopefully give you some things to think about. All right, huge disclaimer. I never had an Amazon wish list. We were a big Donors Choose district. This meant that I always had a live Donors Choose campaign. If it was fulfilled, which is wonderful, someone's donating to our classroom and my students, I would have another campaign up and running within 24 hours. My standby Donors Choose campaign was always the same. It was the largest amount of laminating sheets I could find, cardstock or paper, a color ink cartridge, and maybe some Velcro. What other projects did I have? For the sake of this podcast episode, I went back and looked. Every year I had a main focus. One year I had my classroom library project and it was fulfilled. It was amazing. As a special educator, I did not get a school allowance. I think we had a PTA, but they didn't give anything to me. I remember one year our gen ed teachers got books for their library and I did not. The thinking behind that was that my students were inclusion, so they had access to these books in the general education classroom. However, I was polling intervention groups, which included students in general education and students on my caseload. I was polling them several times throughout the day for intervention. And we needed access to books too. So that was one huge Donors Choose project. Another one was all about fine motor. I think I called it a STEM project. I didn't teach STEM, but I was working with a large group of students that seemed to need more fine motor practice. Many of these students either received OT services or just missed qualifying. So this was a huge Donors Choose project where everything was hands-on. I think I went through Lakeshore and I got all of those different sets, like the gears, different blocks, interlocking cubes. It was wonderful. That was when I was setting up my task boxes, and that became a part of so many different tasks. My students were using task cards, but I added those hands-on materials. Loved that project. Another project is a little bit hard to talk about. I'm probably going to get pretty heated speaking about this, but I think it's time. One year, I did not have chairs for my students to sit in. I requested them and was denied. I was denied chairs. So here's the scoop. My school is wonderful. We had no money though. And the idea was my students could pull their chair from the gen ed setting to be with me. Whether I was pushing into the inclusion classroom or I guess they would be taking these chairs down the hallway to the resource room, I'm not exactly sure. So I said, that's ridiculous. I need chairs. I was asking for, I think, eight chairs. Chairs are very expensive. They are hugely overpriced. And I was given the suggestion, use milk crates. And then I returned with, studies about OT and how important everything was. I was working with young students. And then I just got heated. So I did a Donors Choose. I let people know about the Donors Choose. I'm not sure how my district contacted me, but they basically were like, take down this project. This is making us look absolutely terrible. We're not giving students chairs, because I had written the Donors Choose in a very special way. And I will say, it was fulfilled within 24 hours, and I got a dozen chairs. The chairs arrived. They were all the same color. I put like colorful duct tape on the legs of the chairs. I had cleared that with the gen ed teacher. I put 6 in the gen ed classroom at the small group table. Anybody could use them in the classroom. It wasn't just for my students, but I also took 6 to the resource room, and we had them there. And just one more add-on to this story. Admin tried to take those chairs away every single year, and I had to guard them with my life. That's how I had to advocate for my students, that my students needed chairs. Again, chairs were overpriced. We had no money. We lost a certain amount of chairs per school year, and I think that was always like the hottest commodity. We would do a chair count, and they would count my chairs in that chair count. And I always pushed back and said, no, of course I'm going to leave these chairs if I ever left the school, because they belong to Donors Choose School project, but you cannot take them away when I am here with my students. Anyway, it was crazy. And the gen ed teacher that I worked with, she fought just as hard for those chairs with me. It was so wonderful. And of course, it benefited our students. So this brings me to the last part and my recommendations if you are setting up an Amazon wish list. I will always advocate for students learning in the most developmentally appropriate setting. So if I was setting up an Amazon wish list today, here are the things that I would want to consider. I'm thinking about students' access to supplies. I would want to have a complete set of supplies, both in the inclusion classroom setting and in the resource room. I would want to have these supplies that I can access without losing any student learning time. I would also want to have my students be able to access them when I wasn't there. So this might include having supplies or whatever's appropriate in student seat sacks or cubbies or lockers. I always had a student binder of materials. I have an episode way back when, I'll have to look it up, where I had my students also use a small canvas bag and they filled them with their hands-on manipulatives or visuals or whatever we were using to access the curriculum. And they had their own set. So if I'm setting up an Amazon wish list, I want to think about all of those things my students need. Do they need their own storage container, like a task box, a bin, or a canvas bag? And do they need their own supplies, like a pencil, math manipulatives? We know how expensive those can be, but I wanted my students to have a set. Visuals, maybe I need book rings to make those visuals, like flip cards. I wanted my students to have their own set, so I wasn't fumbling. We weren't moving chairs. I wasn't searching for supplies. My students, bam, they could just reach for them and they had them. My suggestion for you when setting up a wish list is to walk through your students' learning day. What tools are they reaching for over and over again? And make sure you have plenty on hand. For me, it would be the largest box of dry erase markers I could possibly find. I would also want to think about containers for my students, whether it was a canvas bag, a task box, or tray. Next up are those hands-on manipulatives. For my students, that was for both literacy and math. So I may be ordering 1 or 2 classroom sets and then dividing them up. So my students had their own. I never wanted to lose classroom time passing out sets. If I had half an hour with my students, I wanted to be learning for 29 minutes and 30 seconds because idle time was not our friend. Now that I'm reflecting on this episode, I realize this wasn't that interesting. I just shared the basic supplies I wanted my students to have access to. But I do think one theme that came across, or hopefully came across, is how much we advocate for our students. I was looking at their learning day, and I wanted my students to have the same access as any students in the school. I wanted them to be able to be comfortable sitting in a chair and accessing materials. That's what we want for our students. So as you're putting together your wish list, maybe it's not the fanciest items, but it's the items that are going to help your students and make your day run easier so that you can be more present. Well, let me step off this huge soapbox that I am on. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions of must-have items for the classroom. I'm going to put 2 links in the show notes. One is to episode 22. That's where I go into more details and specifics about the tools we love. I will also put a link to my Amazon storefront. I'm going to go right now and look at that store and make sure I have the items that we loved and only the items that we loved in there to help save you some time. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time in the Special Educators Resource Room. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe buttons so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.